It's important that a hunter learn what to eat in his part of the world and know where that type of food is available.
Welcome to this episode of Deer Dirt. Today I'm sitting, of all places, on the edge of the Mojave Desert in eastern California. I was out here with my daughter Jordan and son Drew, and we went to some of the national parks, Sequoia, Kings Canyon, Yosemite, and now I'm heading back home again. And as they say on The Wizard of Oz, Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore, but soon I'll be back to Iowa. But it's going to be a fun backdrop for what I'm going to talk about in this episode, and that's the fact that you can use the HuntStand app no matter where you're at to scout and choose stand locations. So I'm going to go right straight to our farm, and rather than kind of beat around the bush, I'm going to pick the spots off the aerial photo and the topographical map, which is basically the aerial photo with the topo overlay. I like the Mapbox satellite is the layer that I used on HuntStand. So that's what I'm going to be showing you. You can use both layers combined to help you find the best stand locations, because some things only pop out on the aerial photo, which are the more cover related funnels, and some things are easier to see when you've got the topographical lines because they're the terrain related funnels. So we'll talk about both kinds. I'm going to show you some of the best stands on my farm using both of these features. The first spot I want to talk about is what's called an inside corner. And this is a cover related funnel. And you can see that this cornfield makes a corner and the deer funnel around that. Usually it's a field that creates this, but it can be any other type of feature that bottlenecks the cover, narrows it down, so the deer that are crossing from one side to the other, they go around the corner rather than cutting across. This is actually a pretty good spot. I've got a stand here and it's very productive. So this is an easy one to find. They're in, especially in agricultural country where you've got fields that are embedded in the cover. Every corner of those fields creates what's called an inside corner, and those are all great stand locations. So take a look at those right away. Like I said, they bottleneck the deer that are going around the corner of these open areas. The second location I want to talk about would be ditch and draw funnels. And this is a wide range of locations that can be anything from the head of a draw, and this is going to be terrain related. And you'll be able to identify the draws because you'll see the little corner, almost like triangle shaped contour lines. And that indicates the fact that it's if you follow it around, you can see that the contour line goes into the hillside. And as it does that, that signifies the draw going up the side of the slope. And in some cases, especially in ag country, at the bottom of these draws, you're going to find ditches because the soil is going to be soft enough that when the runoff comes through there, it washes away that topsoil and it leaves you with a pretty steep and deep crevice at the bottom. And the deer don't really like to cross those. They'll use gradual crossings, but normally they go up around the top or around the bottom and they don't take on the steepest slopes. So that creates obvious funnels. And even if it's not a ditch, they do still tend to follow the contour lines around the heads of these draws. So that's a real simple one to find in areas that has broken terrain, locations where you've got bluffs and ridges and valleys and so forth. The next spot I want to talk about is a bedding area or a bedding ridge. It's hard to find bedding areas from aerial photos or topographical maps if you don't have any terrain relief. And you could possibly look for areas of thick cover on the aerial photo, but it's a lot easier when you've got some terrain to work with, because then you can see these rounded ends where the cover and the topography demonstrate the fact that you've got a point. Because the deer like to bed high and they like to bed on these points. And they're easy to identify, easy to find when you're looking at the HuntStand app. Those are all important spots to catalog because you can hunt bedding areas, under the right conditions, especially during the rut. I like to set a stand on the downwind fringe of a bedding area great rut stands, but it's also important to know where they're at so you can avoid them. When you're scouting maybe during the season or when you're setting out your trail cameras, you don't really want to be back into those types of locations because you don't want to educate those deer. And going hand in hand with these bedding points are the ditches or draws between them. And it's really another easy one to find because you can see again those draws, you know, the sharply defined, sharp corners of the draws going up the slopes with the rounded ridge tops on each side. So the deer again will bed on the ridges, and they'll travel around the contour lines and go around the head of the draw typically. And ideally, if there's a ditch at the bottom, it makes it even more of a highly used funnel than if it's just an easy crossing the whole way around. But they still tend to go up around even if there's not a ditch. So finding these draws, the head of a draw between two bedding areas is just a classic spot, especially during the rut. Bucks are always looking for does on either sides of these draws, so they find either the easiest crossing or they go around the top. Next, I want to talk about areas that are really steep. And you can find those pretty easily on the app using the contour lines. And the closer they are together, that means that the terrain drops off really steep. It drops off really sharply. And the deer don't use those super steep side hills nearly as much as they use the more flat ground up on top of the ridge. So this creates a funnel. So a lot of the deer that are going around the side will veer their way up, follow the top rather than going across that super steep ground, and then they'll filter back out again on the other side. So bluff edges, the steeper the better. They make great funnels. And this is another classic one. I mean, it's one that, this one separates a bedding area on one side from a feeding area on the other side. So when I get the right buck in that area, that's going to be a classic spot to set up. Creek crossings are another pretty easy one to identify. And again, you don't need topographic map here. You can probably get by just 100% with an aerial photo. When you see an S-curve in a creek, that tells you that you've got a perfect crossing. And the bends create a high bank. Always on the outside of the bend, you end up with a high bank just because of the way erosion works. The water goes around, cuts into that slope, creates a high bank, and then it goes, along a straighter stretch, and then it makes another bend and cuts in and makes another high bank. That spot in the middle of the S almost always has a gradual bank, a gradual slope, and that's where the deer tend to cross. And you can set up on the steep high banks because those serve as funnels too, because the deer aren't crossing there, so they're following them, going around. But generally, the most easy or the easiest setup for a creek is to find those spots in the middle of the S-curve and set up on that natural crossing. Saddles are really easy to find too using the topographical map. You're not going to get any help there using the aerial photo because they just don't show up. But you can see here, I've got two like almost circular raised areas. Again, if you're looking at the contour lines, these are areas of higher elevation. And you can see between the two higher elevation spots, you've got a saddle, and that's a lower spot in between. And even though this one goes across an open field, it connects a draw on one side with a draw on the other. And that's a real natural crossing for the deer. When they're coming across the top of that ridge, it's super convenient for them for two reasons. It's the path of least resistance. They don't have to do as much climbing to go through there, but it also keeps them off the skyline a little bit more, which makes them feel a little bit safer. So again, these saddles, whether they're in the timber or in the open, they tend to be natural locations for the deer to cross. So again, look for saddles. They're pretty easy to find just using the topographical maps, using the features like I've shown you here, where the contour lines make almost like two circular ends with a gap in between. So now I'm going to jump off the farm for these last few. The first one I want to talk about is a high ground crossing. And this is on public land not too far from the farm. And you can see a boggy, swampy area, and you can see it's like a slough or a little waterway. Between the two, there's a wooded stretch, and that's the high ground. The deer will go through the swampy, watery type areas, but they would rather walk the solid ground. So they stick with the high ground crossings. Super easy to find. Again, you can do that off the aerial photo. The topographic map isn't going to help you a whole lot there because there's not a whole lot of change in contour. Maybe only a couple of feet that separates the high ground from the water. But again, just being able to to identify these natural funnels, that's a pretty easy one to find. Now I've got a couple of different spots that show narrow cover strips. And this is 100% aerial photo cover related funnels. And this is when I first started bow hunting, this is what I looked for. I didn't understand terrain related funnels, but it was super easy using the aerial photos that we had back then. You had to go to the NRCS office and request them, and you paid $1 a page, and I had hundreds of dollars wrapped up in those single black and white page aerial photos, but they're so easy to find because you're just looking at the cover. The most obvious ones are when you get just this narrow strip of cover connecting two spots that have, let's say, more habitat, more cover. So you're going to have deer bedding in those areas that have more cover, and then they're connected by these narrow strips. And especially during the rut, the bucks are looking for does, and they're going to find them bedded in these larger patches of cover, and the narrow strips in between are great funnels. And they're easier to hunt too, because you can set them up a lot more surgically, because you'll have a crosswind and it's not really blowing anywhere but out into an open area. So it's at a 90 degrees, let's say, to the strip of cover. Those are classic spots. And the one I'm showing you here is on a lease that I used to hunt. But I'm also going to show you one. This is more like a brushy fence line. This next one. This is where I shot my first buck with a bow on this spot. And man, that was 1990, 35 years ago. I started bow hunting when I was just a kid, but it took a long time before I actually started filling any tags. And this is the spot where I killed him. And it's two little woodlots out in the middle of farm country, and you can see this brushy fence line that connects the two woodlots. And this is, again, just a classic setup because you can take advantage of the wind. You know, it cuts across the brushy fence line, blows out into the open field, and you can set your stand in a location where it's really easy to get in and out of without bumping into deer, and the wind is really easy to play. So this is one that I figured out early, looking at the aerial photos, because you think, yeah, they're going to want to stay close to the cover because of the security that it provides. But yeah, it's a natural, just one that you definitely take advantage every time you see it. Similar to the last feature I talked about is one that I would call corner crossings. And sometimes you get a perfect hourglass where you'll have the corner of one piece of timber match up with the corner of another piece, and that makes a really narrow spot. It'd be ideal if there's a little open gate or something there too, to even sweeten it up more. But the deer will take advantage of any way to stay close to the cover, stay close to security when they're traveling. Again, the larger block represents an area where the does might be bedded, and then the bucks during the rut are going to trade back and forth between those spots. Even though like I said, even though the ideal is when the spots or the blocks of cover are corner to corner, even if they're separated by a certain distance, it's still going to work because they're still going to take advantage of those corners. That's where they're going to leave the cover when they travel from one block to another classic stand location. I've taken you through about a dozen of the best spots that I found over the years from studying aerial photos and topo maps. If you just focus on these key features, and I'm sure you'll discover a few more in the areas that you hunt, you're going to find some great stand locations. And I still spend hours every year studying the HuntStand app, trying to get more confidence in my hunting area, trying to see the big picture, how the deer move through it, how I'm going to be able to sneak in and out of my stand locations. It's almost like looking at the chessboard, pulling it up and studying your property. Even if you've hunted it for years, it still serves great purpose being able to get that refresher. Here I am sitting in the Mojave Desert, 100 degrees, sweating, talking to you. And I'm still focused on deer hunting. I'm just a couple of weeks away from the season opening, and I'm excited about it, so I'm looking at the app. So take advantage of anything that you can learn without actually putting your feet on the ground, because the traditional scouting where you're walking around is going to leave a lot of scent, and it's going to be a way that you're going to educate deer, and you can learn almost as much by studying the app and then maybe going in and spot checking a few of these locations. But after you get some experience, you're going to find you don't even need to spot check the locations. You can hunt with almost 100% confidence just going off the topographical maps and the aerial photos. Well, thanks for joining me this year for the HuntStand series. This was episode 10 of 10, so I'm done for 2025. Hopefully you picked up a few things along the way. Good luck this fall. I appreciate it, and good hunting.